Life as Ceremony shares personal stories, interviews with inspirational souls, and practical wisdom to help you reconnect with yourself and spirituality. Welcome back to another episode of Life as Ceremony. Today we have Eliza joining us. She is a somatic psychotherapist and yogic breathwork teacher who lives in the rural hills of New England because she just bought a new home. Congratulations, Eliza. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's so good to be here.
Yeah. Today we are going to talk about the connection between anger and authenticity. But before we do, we're going to play this or that, and I might even ask a couple rapid fire questions. Are you ready,
Okay,
Eliza?
I'm ready. Let's
Okay.
go.
Um, Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee,
Coffee. Yeah.
unfortunately.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset,
Sunset. Dogs or cats?
dogs.
Yeah. Where is Luna?
Oh, she's here. She's passed out somewhere.
Oh, love that. Um, I'm sharing this one with you because I know you're also a writer.
Mhm.
Um, but what do you prefer to read, fiction or nonfiction?
Ooh, okay. It goes in waves, and I'm in a big fiction wave right now. So right now, in this moment, fiction.
Amazing. Can I ask what you're reading?
Yes, I actually just started Jane Eyre,
Okay.
by Charlotte Bronte. When
Nice.
there's this is maybe too much information, but I love the Libby app,
Okay.
that, like, you can read from
Oh,
different libraries and stuff,
yes.
but sometimes the books that I wanna read have really long wait lists. So
Uh-huh.
when a book that I wanna read has a really long wait list, I'll usually, like, go back to really, like, old, like, I read Pride and Prejudice recently, and now I'm reading Jane Eyre.
Nice.
Um, so I go back to the classics because those are easily available when I'm waiting.
I love that. Amazing. And what a solid tip for our listeners. Okay. Do you have a favorite season?
I just recently figured out that I am a big winter gal. I love winter.
Yay. Okay. I feel if you're watching the video of this, you can like see my excitement. I'm so happy to know I'm not alone. I love winter. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
That's great. Yeah.
It makes sense because we're both deep thinkers and feelers.
Yeah. And introverts with no social life who like to hibernate, right? No, I'm
Exactly.
just kidding. I'm just
Oh.
kidding. What is your favorite thing to cook these days?
Ooh, um, well, truth be told, I haven't been doing a ton of cooking because, as we'll get into, I'm pregnant
Yeah.
and I've been having some serious like smell aversions.
Okay.
But the thing that I like to eat the most right now is um like a bison chili.
A bison chili.
Yeah,
Yummy. Very
for
nice. Do you do
whatever
it in the
reason
slow
that's
cooker?
like in the slow cooker, yeah.
Nice. Awesome.
Mhm.
Okay, and then last one, just if you have a favorite quote or words to live by, even if it's like just something that's like relevant or top of mind for you lately.
Mm. Um, well, something that we'll definitely dive into is this idea that anger is an act of self-love, or
Mhm.
anger is anger is a form of self-love and self-care. That's what I've been really sort of feeling into lately.
I love that. I love that those are your like words to live by or what's inspiring you right now in this moment. Because after I read your post on Substack, I felt the same way of like, wow, anger is an act of self-love. And I'm super excited to hear all your wisdom and for you to share it here on Life as Ceremony with others so that we can really understand, yeah, what you mean by that.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Before we, dive right into anger, I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about what brought you to where you are today, even in the rural hills of New England, but maybe even also as a somatic psychotherapist, a bit about your journey.
Yeah. So where to even begin? I was born on, no, I'm just kidding. Um, I noticed when I was in my 20s that I was really disconnected and really like dissociated a lot of the time and really coped with life by disengaging with it. Um, and by sort of luck, I had a few sort of instances of teachers, and I also went to school for integrative health. I got my first master's degree in integrative health. Honestly, because I just wanted to move to San Francisco, and that was like the easiest way for me to move to San Francisco without getting like a corporate job. So I started going to school in San Francisco for integrative health without even really knowing what integrative health meant truly.
Mhm.
And it was there where I started to learn more about somatic psychology and mindfulness and how integrative health and like nutrition and all of these things, mind, body, soul, played a role in our health and in our well-being. And it was really there where I really started to my healing journey, and I really started to learn, oh, these are all coping mechanisms. The my need to sort of disengage, my dissociation, my, all of these things were coping mechanisms, and they were protective mechanisms because for whatever reason I didn't feel safe. And
Mhm.
it was through years of like somatic psychology and through meditation and all of that where I really started to remember certain experiences, past traumas, childhood traumas, and it all started to sort of click into place.
Mhm.
And so, without even really knowing why I was doing these healing modalities and these things, I started to sort of heal. And, 10 years later, now I'm recognizing and I have the whys and I have the memories back and I, have all of that. And it was really through learning from both an educational standpoint, but then also experimenting everything myself
Mhm.
that things just started to really click. And this work is so powerful, especially
Mhm.
if, especially for people who feel like something's wrong with them and they don't quite know what is wrong with them, quote
Mhm.
unquote,
Mhm.
um, to recognize, oh, right, I'm not broken. These are just protective mechanisms that are supporting me and keeping me alive in the way that I need to in these moments. Um, and so it was really like my own personal journey that led me to
Mhm.
then pursue um, different modalities like obviously somatic experiencing. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, and then got another master's degree in counseling psychology so that I could ethically sort of do the deeper trauma work that I wanted to do. um, and now I'm in a place where, yeah, I'm kind of blending it all together, working one-on-one with folks, and then also teaching things like breathwork and Kundalini yoga, and all these things that were instrumental to my own healing journey,
Mhm.
um, to support others who are maybe on the more depressive scale, and
Mhm.
side of things. So that is a very abridged version, but
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing the abridged version with us. It's really clear, like you just kind of following your authentic path, like led you to helping others with some of the same tools you explored yourself of like gathering what worked for you, what did you find the most powerful, and now you share it with other people and help them heal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Um, so anger.
So anger. Let's get it.
Well, speaking of like authenticity and following your authentic path, one thing that stood out to me on your Substack post was anger is key to our authenticity.
Hmm.
Tell us more. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and apologies if you hear Luna barking in the background.
Okay, we're super dog friendly here. We love
Okay,
it.
good.
Yeah.
I figured. Um, but yeah, so just for people who haven't read my Substack, I wrote a piece right after the US election, and we'll get into that story on anger. And what I've really started to learn about anger, I mean, a couple things. So from like a psychological perspective, anger really lets us know that something doesn't feel quite right. Like anger lets us know that um, there has been an injustice done or something doesn't feel fair. And that's really the definition of anger in at least emotion focused therapy. They talk a lot about how anger is like something's not fair or something is unjust. And we
Mhm,
need to, reverse that injustice in order to sort of release our anger. I don't
mhm,
necessarily believe in that, but it also lets us know that there's a part of us that is feels hurt and feels wounded.
mhm,
Um, and so when we can sort of recognize anger as it comes up as this sort of protective mechanism, it's this part of us that's feeling like there was a wrong or feeling violated in some way. And as you know, as a counselor, and as just a person living in the world, so many of us suppress our anger and we learn that anger is bad, or we learn that it's not safe or okay to feel our anger.
mhm,
We also might have grown up in environments where, like, a parent was super explosive when they got angry. So
mhm,
we learned that anger was sort of associated with this idea of explosiveness or violence or even hate sometimes. Um, and that we don't wanna be that, we wanna try to avoid being an angry person at all costs. But anger isn't that. Anger isn't violence. It's not, you know, when we can honor our anger, it's it's showing us the parts of ourselves that we need to tend to, you know? And then when it comes to authenticity and how it kinda comes together with authenticity, authenticity is, I think it was Gabor Mate who said something like, authenticity is our ability to be true to ourselves and to in turn shape our life from that place of deep knowledge and understanding of what is true for us.
mhm,
And so if we're totally neglecting parts of ourselves because we're
mhm,
afraid to feel our anger, or if we're suppressing certain emotions and certain wounded parts and hurt parts of ourselves, then that in turn, we're not being really true to ourselves. We're not honoring all parts of ourselves. Um,
mhm,
so we're inherently pushing certain parts down, or certain values down, or boundaries down. And we're not really connected to our truth,
mhm.
which I kind of say our truth and our authenticity is kind of the same thing in that way.
Totally. Someone who is suppressing a part or who's not allowing themselves to honor the anger or the hurt, what would you say to them?
Mm, I would say that that's a really important protective mechanism, maybe,
Mhm,
you know? I would get curious about why they don't feel safe feeling their anger.
mhm,
In my experience as a counselor, more often than not, it's because of how we were taught
mhm,
about our anger growing up. And so I'd get curious about that. And I would just say that, you know, that that mechanism of
mhm,
suppressing anger really worked for you for a while, you suppressing the anger, it worked for a while, but it doesn't anymore. And so let's get curious about that and let's see how you can be both authentic and feel your anger or be true to your emotions,
mhm,
without this fear of, like, abandonment or fear of attachment wounds
mhm,
or that sort of thing. That's a lot of the times what it is we just, for whatever reason, learned that in order to be in relationship, we had to suppress certain emotions.
mhm,
So kind of detaching this idea of, um, having to be a people pleaser or having to
mhm,
be easygoing or whatever it is. And I mean, especially women in our world today, um,
mhm,
we learn to push down our emotions in order to be in relationship with others,
mhm.
you know? Uh,
Totally.
and so, yeah, I would just say to them that you can have it both ways. You can be fully authentic and you can be in safe, healthy relationships.
Mm. Wow. Can you repeat that last line one more time?
You can I?
You can
Um,
have it both ways. You can be both. Yeah. Very
yeah, you can be both authentic and you
yes.
can be in healthy relationships.
Amazing. It was just really powerful. Yeah. No, that's great and incredible. And I want to ask you, what are common reasons, what are common perceptions people have about anger, or what do a lot of people learn about anger growing up? And why I ask you this is because I have a feeling that your answer is going to be what a lot of listeners can relate to, or oh, I thought that, or oh, I still think that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, like why do we think the way that we think about anger, and where did those perceptions come from?
Yeah. I could go in so many different directions in terms of the systems at play that teach us what anger is and what anger isn't, patriarchal sort of values,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But I think really what it comes down to is in so many of at least the clients that I see and in my personal experience, anger was really only uh it was a privilege to feel anger that I didn't receive. I didn't receive that privilege, I think, as a woman and as a young girl. And it was sort of, it's safer to be sad as a woman and it's safer to be angry as a man in a lot of
Mhm.
situations. And I think, um the most sort of common thing that I hear is there was no room for my anger growing up in my household because it was either one of my caretakers, typically the father, who actually a lot of the times the mom too, in a lot of ways. And there's this sort of feeling that anger is power,
Mhm.
you know? And so when the person who has the most power is the one that's allowed to feel angry and everybody else sort of has to walk on eggshells around them.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's this sort of dynamic of explosivity. Everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. And then boom, everything's not fine. People are screaming, people are slamming doors, people are like going into their opposite sides of the house and screaming. And it's really scary. And
Mhm.
our young bodies take that and they think, this is scary. I don't want this. If this is what anger is, I don't want to feel this.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that's the biggest thing is that anger has been portrayed to so
Mhm.
many of us that it's explosive and it's violent and it's
Mhm.
controlling and sort of a way to gain power. I know in my household, the person that could scream the loudest was typically the person who won the argument.
Mhm.
And so that is another sort of thing too, right? Where,
Mhm.
okay, and my voice isn't heard or seen. And so I just need to sort of walk on eggshells and I just need to like be okay with
Yeah.
not expressing the injustice that I feel, that sense of unfairness that I feel, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so these are like a lot of perceptions of anger being explosive, controlling, power. These are perceptions of anger.
Mm.
Tell me more about what anger really is and more about what anger isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that we associate anger with hate.
Mhm.
Um, and again, kind of control and power. And we think that anger is outrage or big or explosive. And it's actually not any of those things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anger is an emotion just like joy, just like sadness, just
Mhm.
like what's another emotion? Excitement. you know, it's an emotion that comes and goes if we allow it to. Um, And what I've been really exploring in my own personal practice,
Mhm.
what I wrote about in my Substack piece is that I'm starting to understand and be in relationship with my anger where I see it as a form of self-love and
Mhm.
care.
Mhm.
like I was saying before, it's an indication that there's a hurt part of you. It's an indication when we feel angry, it's an indication that something isn't quite right, that a boundary or that a value of ours has been violated in some way, shape, or form. And so instead of suppressing the anger or instead of being explosive and outraged about it, can we just sit with it and say, "Hey, oh, wow, I'm really angry right now. Like I can feel the energy of anger in my body.
Mhm.
What's this about?" Like
Mhm.
and getting really curious and compassionate of like, what's this thing that's happening? If
Mhm.
something doesn't feel quite right, what is that thing? And what part of me feels really hurt or wounded right now? And
Mhm.
can I show that part of my self-love and
Mhm.
compassion? And so in that way, I'm starting to think about it as this form of deep, deep self-love and self-care.
Mhm.
Because when anger arises, it tells us that we're hurt and that we need to tend to our hurt part, our
Mhm.
hurt selves.
Mhm.
And so it's like, it's I don't know, it's just something has clicked for me in that way where it has given me so much more space to feel anger and to
Mhm.
acknowledge it as a really powerful tool for action and for communicating what my boundaries and my values are and for getting clear on those things.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's really about like disentangling this idea, like disentangling hate from anger.
Mhm.
They're two separate things.
Totally.
Um, and I think just a big piece of that is changing our relationship to anger.
Yeah.
And if we start to think about it as a way of showing ourselves love and
Mhm.
care, and an indication that we need to sit with ourselves a little bit longer and give ourselves that tender, loving care, then we can begin to really see it for the really useful and powerful emotion that it is.
Mhm. Beautiful. I really think that our perceptions shape our realities. And
Mm,
if we hold a perception that anger is explosive, anger is hate, if we hold that perception, then we don't get to be in touch with everything that you're sharing on this whole episode. And I think even for me, reading your Substack piece even shifted my perception of anger, even
mm,
the perception. I think the perception I held before I read the piece was that I really held the perception, when I was younger, I used to hold the perception that anger was bad.
mhm,
I was at a place in my life where I did not view anger as bad anymore in terms of practicing through the lens of mindfulness and welcoming emotions as messengers. It's just trying to tell me something. But when I read your post, it took me to a depth or a perception that I hadn't explored before, which was anger is a form of self love. For me, that was a new perception to read it. And when I did, it really stuck with me. And so I also think for anyone out, like reframes are really powerful and
yeah.
our perceptions form our reality. And so if we're able to try on different perceptions, and if we're able to try on this perception of what you're sharing with us, of anger as a form of self love, anger as a form of self care in terms of tending to those wounded parts,
Mm.
wow, how much could that shift our reality and how we care for ourselves, you know?
I think so. I think you're right, and thank you for sharing that. And I agree. Perceptions are so important, and reframes are so important. And just to be super crystal clear, like we're not, you and I are not suggesting that um, outrage or rage is in a more explosive way is, uh, you know, valid in that way.
Mhm.
But it's more saying how can we tend to our anger without it moving into rage? I think of rage and anger as two very different things,
Mhm.
where rage is sort of like, you're seeing red, there's
Mhm.
smoke coming out of your ears and you're reacting in a way that
Right.
is harmful and hurtful. And again, that's
Mhm.
where we get this perception of hate and violence with anger.
Mhm.
But I think of that more as rage,
Mhm.
whereas anger is that form of self-love and is that sort of flag that we can say, "Oh, something is being violated here. Let me sit with this. Let me feel the sensation in the body. Let me like be fully with myself and let me care for myself
Mhm.
because something is alive within me that I care about,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
So
Uh,
just that distinction I think is important.
no, thank you for that distinction. I appreciate it. And to just language is really important and to differentiate between rage and anger. And so when it comes to our boundaries or values kind of being violated or this something in us that feels unjust, often someone or something crossed that boundary or
Mhm.
challenged us or pushed us against that value.
Right.
And I'm curious, what are safe and appropriate ways to be in our anger with other people or be in our anger or communicate our anger to someone else
Mm,
without going to that place? Because it's one thing to sit with the emotion in ourselves and remain curious, allow ourselves to feel it in whatever way it shows up, allow it to communicate with us and allow it to us to tend to whatever needs to be tending to. But what are safe or appropriate ways to like let someone know we're angry or that they've done something that made us feel that way?
yeah. It is definitely different for everyone. What I sort of share with my clients and what I do myself is to first of all just name it.
Mm,
I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling triggered. I'm feeling whatever word you want to use,
mhm,
upset. Um, and I need to go tend to myself.
mhm,
And the power of removing yourself from a
mhm,
situation where you feel angry and therefore, this sort of protective mechanism and energy comes through. It's very sort of fight or flight energy, anger is. And so if you can hopefully remove yourself and be in relationship with people who respect that and say, "Oh, okay, she needs time to tend to herself." So, when me and my husband get in a fight and I'm really, really angry, I'm sometimes not successful, but I try to not go into that rage state and to stay with my anger and to first just name it. Hey, I'm feeling
mhm,
really upset and angry right now. I need to go tend to myself.
mhm,
And then it's like, how can I be with this anger? And sometimes anger feels like it's too overwhelming. And so
mhm,
sometimes you do need to kind of uh tend to it by dousing it with quote unquote water, whatever that
mhm,
is. If it's
mhm,
some yoga or if it's, dancing or anything, right? But it's that sort of being with that energetic charge in the body. Um, and for me, usually it's literally just sitting with it and then either clenching my fists or finding that kind of safe container where I can feel that energy. And then from that place, I can say, What part of me feels really hurt right now? Like what part is this anger trying to protect?" And then I can say, "Oh, it's this tender, sweet, old part of me." And then I can tend to that part. And this is all sort of happening in the brain. And this is why, one-on-one work is so valuable, is because be, you can go through this process with like a
mhm,
therapist and to get really crystal clear on what parts feel wounded with your anger, whether it's anger towards a parent or anger towards a sibling or anger towards a perpetrator or anything like that, and really start to befriend and tend to those wounded parts. And then from that place, I can come back after spending time with my anger and spending time with my wounded parts. I can come back to my husband and I can say, "Okay, this is what's really happening underneath this
mhm,
anger right now. I
mhm,
feel like you violated X, Y, and Z um, things for me. And like we can course correct from that we can repair from that place." So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but
Yeah, no, it totally does. I think one thing I want to highlight that you touched on is this pause and removal of self from it. And I was really actually I'm gonna go on a little tangent. I was really happy to hear you pull in that metaphor of what tending to the fire looks like when you mentioned yoga or this or that, because I was sitting with the idea of, okay, wait, we're removing ourselves from the person or situation that provoked the anger. And in my own mind, I was kind of playing a metaphor that to stay, they might be the kindling or something that's going to spread this fire a lot louder if we
Totally.
don't go tend to it, right? And
Mhm.
tending to it might look like water. Tending to it might just be like sitting around a bonfire for a little bit of not like trying to put it out in any way, but just kind of like allowing it space to be. But similar to if we're camping or whatnot, we don't want that bonfire to spread into a
Yeah.
wildfire. And so I just kind of sat with the idea and it just resonated with me of, okay, that's kind of why we remove ourselves from that situation or that person. Is because maybe they're the kindling or the fuel, and it's just not safe for that anger to be around that person or that environment in that very moment.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and like a very real sort of recent example for me was, you know, living through the US election recently and recognizing that me being on social media,
Mm.
for scrolling, there's a really big difference between being informed
Mhm.
and stoking anger
Mhm.
and hate and polarization and all of these things. And I recognized that I was sort of starting to cross over to the line
Mhm.
of that boundary, right? And I was so angry, like, the days leading up to the election and the days following the election, it was so emotionally intense for me, and I know everybody else, but it just I was so angry in a way that I hadn't felt in probably ever, um,
Mhm.
and I recognize that, yeah, being on social media or even listening to my usual news podcasts and that sort of thing, it was fueling this anger into a wildfire.
Mhm.
Where I could no longer tend to it, where I could no
Yeah.
longer contain it,
Right.
and that's not helpful, and it's harming not only yourself, but your relationships and everyone else around you, and
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's like, yeah, be angry, but make sure that your fire is contained and that you
Mhm.
can, um, grow it slowly but surely, or you can sort of douse it, that you have control over that fire at any given point, I think is a really important thing, and I love that metaphor.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's a very collaborative metaphor there between the two of us. I love it. Yeah, no, you described that in a beautiful way. And yeah, for just anyone watching the visual, even watching your hands move gave me a sense of she was moving her hands in and out, but I could just see in an embodied way of, oh yeah, like I'm in control of if I want to grow this fire or put it out. And not making either one mean good, bad, right, or wrong, but just allowing the fire, allowing it to be contained versus that wildfire, lack of control, lack of containment.
Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
totally.
I wanted to ask you what inspired this piece that you wrote about anger and authenticity, or even just for listeners listening to all of this, what inspired all these thoughts for you about anger and authenticity?
Yeah, it's been something that I've been working through my own anger for years now, and, as we sort of said at the beginning of our conversation, um, I just moved back to the States. I just moved back to New England. I grew up outside of Boston. I was living in Vancouver for like 7 years, which is where we met, with my husband, who's from Vancouver. And before moving back in September, I had not lived near or around my family in over 10 years. Um, and so it's been a journey of I mean, now, right now we're living with my parents because we're renovating our house that we just bought. And so it went from 10 years of living on opposite coasts from my family to 24/7 I'm living with my parents as a 32-year-old. And let me tell you, that has been
Balance.
the biggest spiritual journey one can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and not to mention, so I mentioned I'm pregnant, and I'm expecting in spring 2025, which I'm really obviously we're thrilled about, and everybody in my family's thrilled about.
Mm,
Um, but I think, being living so far away for 10 years, I would only come back and stay for a week and a half, 2 weeks at a time. You don't really see, I mean, it's those visits sort of revolve around you, and it's fun and it's family time, and you know but living back with my parents, I don't think I really could have anticipated like
mm,
how different our political views have become.
mm,
And I didn't realize, like, yeah, just how extreme that feeling would feel. I mean, especially it was so heightened during the election season, and I
mhm,
moved in September, election was in November, and,
mhm,
you know, and here I am pregnant, and
mhm,
me and my parents have these differing views. So again, it was just like bombarded, like, in my face, so much.
mhm,
So
mhm,
the days leading up to the election, the days leading, that followed, I was just so angry, like, and it was something that I was having to sit with, and it was something that I was having to get really, really crystal clear on, and that, like, eventually it it became really clear that these issues, women's reproductive health and women's rights and, um all of these different things, like, these are the things that I really value and that I really, really care about, because I was so angry about it as a pregnant, I was 15 weeks pregnant at the
mhm,
election. And I just was like, this is not fair. This is not fair for me to have to worry about my health
mhm,
as a woman who is arguably in her most vulnerable time in her life, right? And it just it just made me so crystal clear that, like, yeah, these are my values. These are the things that matter most to me. And
mhm,
if I am going to be authentic, and if I'm going to live in my values, I have to do something, or I have to say something, or I have to tend to my fire in a way that it can create sustainable change, and not just outrage, and not just me being mad at my parents or mad at my family for having different views or priorities than me, right? Because what good
mhm,
is that going to do? Um,
mhm,
and so the piece that I wrote on Substack really came out of this place of authenticity, what was alive for me in that moment, and yeah, it was super alive. So here we are.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
can.
think it's something that maybe, again, living in Canada,
Mhm,
and then coming back, living in the States. I moved to Canada right after Trump was elected for the first time. I'll just say
mhm,
that. So this is my first time living in a post-Trump America, and it is
mhm,
different and it feels different.
mhm,
Um, and I think, yeah, I don't, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just think it's an important piece of, um, now more than ever is such an important time to be able to decipher rage from hate. I mean, rage from anger, and anger, um, can be this really powerful tool if we don't let it become a forest fire.
mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, and thanks for sharing that living in a post-Trump election, it does feel different, you know? I'm not 100% sure where all of our listeners from, but I can imagine there's a lot in Canada. So thanks for like letting us know that because we're not there or seeing or experiencing what you are and just knowing that it's different and you live there and you just bought a home there, you know? Yeah.
And it's different, and it's also, like, it's it's definitely not as extreme as the media
As the media
portrays.
projects. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um, and there is still so much love, and the fact that there's so much love between me and my parents still,
Mhm. Mhm.
like, to allow politics like this to break up relationships, I think
Mhm.
is really sad,
Mhm.
and I think it just goes to show that we're not dealing with our anger in the proper ways, and that we're not, learning to be with ourselves in more self-love and self-caring ways, and be with each other in more self-care and self-loving ways, and I think that's the most important thing that we can do
Mhm.
is learn how to be with people who might feel differently, and how we can be both angry and show love simultaneously, because again, they're not diametrically opposed. They're
Mhm.
very they're just, yeah.
Yeah.
So living with those sort of false dichotomies, I think, is so important.
Mhm. You're touching on something I feel like I often chat about with clients or people in my life, and it's the idea that opposites can coexist. I
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I and and that reframe or that perception really helped and supported me a long time ago, right? Because when we think that things can only be one way or that we can only feel one thing, we can fight, that opposite that's coming in rather than allowing and accepting both to be true.
yeah.
And I want to talk about like valuing authenticity. So I do have
Mm.
a question for you. I do have a question.
Yeah.
But a while ago was asking myself the question, like, how can I coexist with people who are very different from me? How can
Mm,
I coexist with people who have very different values than me? And I mean, even again, your wisdom around anger helps me with that.
mm,
And something else that helps me with that is valuing authenticity, not
mm,
only my own, but someone else's, because I
mm.
don't think we're ever going to live in a world where everyone's truth is the same.
Yeah.
And
Nor would we want to. It would be so boring and
yeah.
um unhelpful.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So we're
Tough route.
gonna we're gonna run up against things in life that provoke this fire or provoke this anger. And we're going to have to coexist with people who have different values, who are walking a different path or a different truth.
Mhm.
And so I also want to turn it back to you of what else do you think helps people coexist with people and not ruin or damage or let go of relationships when
Yeah.
there's two very different truths in the same room.
Yeah. You know what comes up for me as you say that is um thinking about these people that are really challenging in our lives,
Mhm,
um as our teachers. If we
mhm,
were just surrounded by people who thought the same and felt the same and were the
mm,
same and X, Y, and Z, um, we're not learning anything about ourselves. We're not growing. Yes, we might feel safe, and that's important to have those
mhm,
places and spaces that we feel safe and comfortable,
mhm,
that we can go back to and rest. But if we're not interacting with people who challenge us, we're not learning. And
mhm,
so, you know, thinking about these people as our teachers has really supported me in, again, coming at it from a place of love of w- what are these people teaching me about myself?
mhm,
And again, it goes back to, oh, you know, this past election,
mhm,
I got really clear that these people who thought differently and prioritized different things when they went into the voting ballot,
mhm,
they're teaching me that I really care about these other things. What a
mhm,
gift that is,
mhm, mhm.
really. And, oh, if I really care about these other topics and issues and things, then I can do something about that. I can find organizations and I can find communities that have those similar values, and I can, fight the good fight in that way that feels good for me. And so I wouldn't have known that otherwise. You know
Mhm,
what I mean? So I think, again, this sort of change in perspective of what you were saying earlier, and this sort of reframe of
mhm,
maybe it's mm, maybe it's not about sort of understanding others, but it's about, what are they teaching us? What
mhm.
are these people that feel really differently or that prioritize different things? Um, what are they teaching me about myself that I really care about? So that's really helped me.
Amazing. Yeah. I love it. And I think that even though today's podcast is about authenticity and truth, and this question is more geared, how do we coexist with people who are different than us? I think it's really important and a lot of people will be able to relate to it. So I just want to like recap the three things that have come from this bit of conversation around um, coexisting with people who are different, acknowledge and feel your anger, welcome opposites and know that it's okay for them to coexist, value authenticity, which will allow us to respect someone else's truth, even if it's not our own. And other people are our teachers, especially those who maybe hold quite different values than we do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just wanted to recap those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of your anger. It's such a gift. It's such
It
a gift.
is. It's a gift. Yeah. I just have a couple of questions left for you, Eliza.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about is listening to our truth or listening to our anger, because I
Mm,
think it's one thing to become aware of it.
mhm,
Um, but I guess not only tending to the fire, but I mean like when we need to take action. And maybe
mm,
rather than anger, maybe we focus on truth for a moment because anger shows us our truth, right? Like it can show us what we care about, right? And it can
totally.
kind of, and I think just in general, when we wake up or acknowledge truth, our truth, and it results in maybe needing to take an action, maybe
Yeah.
needing to leave a relationship, maybe needing to leave a job, maybe needing to move or have a different environment. So, not
Mm,
just anger, but just this line of really following our truth. We can
mhm,
become aware of what it is, but it can be really hard to, I say, listen, because for me, listening requires action to really communicate this essence of I'm listening.
yeah.
Um, so, you're a therapist, and I wanted to ask you for listeners. How can we help people listen to their truth? And what do we do if we're not ready to listen to it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an important question, because it really is hard to listen to our
Mhm,
truth,
mhm,
as many people know, and a lot of clients I see, they're like, I don't know if this is my truth or if this is just another sort of protective mechanism, like, you know, that sort of thing. And so I want to just name that. One, you're not alone in thinking that trusting your truth and acting on your truth is
yeah,
hard, because it is very hard. And then also the second thing that's really important is that sometimes we have to sort of forfeit following our truth, at least for a little bit,
mhm,
um, in order to maintain a sense of safety. So sometimes we kind of know what our truth is, like maybe you're in a job that you hate.
mhm,
um, but it's not realistic, or it's not safe for you financially and to create that sense of stability for you to leave that job. Or maybe you are in an abusive relationship and it's not physically safe for you to just get up and go.
mhm,
Um, and so sometimes it's not safe to follow our truth, and we have to honor that, and we have to really listen to that. So I think prioritizing safety first,
mhm,
um, is really, really important. So finding those environments, finding people, and finding those practices that help you feel safe within yourself and
mhm,
within your body, right? so that over time, slowly but surely, you can start to say, "Oh, this is my truth," and,
Mhm.
you know, um, that sort of thing. So I think that's a really important piece. And then from there, once you do find that safety within yourself and within your environments and that sort of thing, it's really baby steps. Like you just it's kind of trial and error, and it's like a muscle, listening to your truth and acting on your truth is a muscle that gets easier and easier with time the more that we do it. But it's about sort of finding that yes and that no in your
Mhm.
body and listening to that place. And so sometimes that will be really obvious. Other times you might have to sit and practice for a little bit in meditation or in yoga for a little bit before that answer comes to you. But one like really simple kind of fun tool is like going to a restaurant and saying, going down each menu item on the menu and saying, "Do I want this?" And then feeling if there's a yes or if there's a no in the
Mhm.
body, because they
Mhm.
feel very different somatically in the body. And that's like a cool way to like practice little baby steps. And then from there you can build and build and build and build. So, yeah, just know that it's a muscle. And if you're not used to living in your truth, then it's going to be really weak.
And that's
And that's
okay.
okay.
Yeah. So work it out. Yeah.
So finding that safety and then little by little
Yeah.
finding that yes and that no in the body.
Yeah. I really appreciate like these two different examples of something that's maybe more extreme versus something that's more simple, because with that extreme stuff, I really heard your emphasis on safety, and that's the foundation. And then safety is actually part of listening to our truth.
Yeah.
And and I heard that emphasis with more, extreme situations where our truth is poking at us, that something in our life needs to change or be different, and
Mhm.
we might just take time to before we're living in in that truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I
Which is
appreciate
a
your
really tough place to live. It's, that sort
yeah,
of impatience and that sort of thing. And I get that.
yeah,
Um, but you're ultimately causing yourself more harm if you quit the job
yeah, when it's
and
not safe to.
when it's not safe to, right? Or you leave the relationship when it's not safe to. So
Totally. Yeah. And I appreciate this simple example as well, because I think that um you know, for many situations, safety already exists and you can already start working out that muscle. So look for those areas of life where you can begin working out, and safety, enough safety already exists for you to explore that. Yeah.
yeah, that's a really good way of saying that.
Yeah. Okay. Final two questions for you. Um, so as you know, this podcast, Life is Ceremony, is very much about making daily practices and rituals ceremonious. And what
I
is this?
love.
And what is a ceremony that you can share with us that we can do when we're feeling angry?
Mm. The thing that has really supported me in my recent little bout of anger is I share these songs on my Substack post about anger, so you can find them there. But there's these three songs that are my water songs.
Nice.
Um, and I put them on and I kind of dance and I flow, and water douses fire, as we
Mhm.
know. And so kind of thinking about our emotions as elements has really been a supportive practice for me. And so whether it's getting into a bath or whether it's putting on those songs and like float, like moving my body in more sort of water
Mhm.
elemental style, more flowy. Um, those two things have been the biggest things, is like when my anger starts to move more into the forest fire territory, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm gonna call on the element of water to
Nice.
support in dousing that.
Beautiful, amazing. And we've talked so much about your Substack. I will definitely link it so people can come find you and subscribe and find this piece on anger that you wrote. That's really beautiful. And for those who don't have Substack, or even just if you're listening to this and want to take action right away, they can also find their own water songs, what represents that or means that for them, and this beautiful invitation from you to turn on that song and move your body in a flowy way. And that's your, simple ceremony to honor anger. And I really beautiful as well of honoring the fire and the water and these elements and being opposites as well. Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Earlier in today's episode, we chatted a lot about parts. And your Substack is called All Parts. How have we not named that by now? We made it through the whole episode without naming the Substack for some reason. But it's called All Parts. And I'm wondering if you could share with listeners a little bit about your online platform, the All Parts Home, and other ways that they can find you, work with you, support you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So my business is All Parts Therapy and Wellness, and so I offer one-on-one therapy, excuse me, um, to anyone over the world, all over the world. And then I also have something called the All Parts Home, which is an online monthly membership, where I teach yogic breathwork classes twice a week, live and recorded. There's tons of online resources. And I know we both sort of share this passion of creating little moments and practices in our day-to-day life that feel like we're reconnecting with ourselves. And so All Parts Home is really a community about building sustainable practices. My one-on-one work, therapy is super helpful and supportive. And what I've found again and again and again, both personally and in my professional life, is that when therapy is not paired with day-to-day practices and moments of reconnection with yourself, then it's not as effective. It's just not as it doesn't integrate as well, right? And so my All Parts Home membership is really a place where people can start to integrate some of the lessons that they've learned through deeper healing modalities, through breath work, through coming together. And Yeah, so that's an amazing resource that I'm continuing to build out, and an amazing community that we're building. And then I offer some group, one-off workshops or that sort of thing too. So you can always join us for one of those.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here, Eliza.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. It's been such a pleasure.